One of my subscribers asked me if I could explain the so-called controversy surrounding Hans Hermann Hoppe and his comments towards gays. Um, and another subscriber of mine has asked me what the deal with Hans Hermann Hoppe is. Is he like a big deal? He said he had heard Jeffrey Tucker reference him, and Jeffrey Tucker seemed to have a very laudatory attitude. Well, to put it bluntly, Hans Hermann Hoppe probably has a better claim than anybody else to being the most important living libertarian theoretician alive. Maybe that's debatable. There are others I would, put up there, like perhaps Robert Higgs. But to give you some idea, he was a protege of Murray Rothbard. He's from Germany. He came to study in the United States with Rothbard, and eventually developed his own justification for property rights based on argumentation that Rothbard considered the best justification for property rights that he'd ever seen, better than Locke, better than anything. Among many other notable achievements, he wrote several books. One very famous one, probably his most famous, it's called Democracy, the God That Failed. That's a play on another book by a different author called Communism, the God That Failed. And Democracy, the God That Failed is a book that converted several conservatives, paleocons, into anarcho-capitalists. Notably, the regrettably passed away Joe Sobran, one of the most underestimated political libertarian conservative thinkers, I think, and writers in a long time. And it was through reading Joe Sobran and learning about Joe Sobran that I learned about Hans Hermann Hoppe. And interestingly enough, and this is all in my How I Became an Anarchist video where I go into more detail, Sobran had been interviewed. Well, I know someone who was good friends with Sobran, and this person said, well, Sobran became an anarcho-capitalist because he read a book by Hans Hermann Hoppe called Democracy, the God That Failed. This was right when I was becoming interested in the idea of anarcho-capitalism, but had not yet accepted it. I was still a minarchist. I found an interview with Joe Sobran on the Scott Horton show. This interview would have been conducted probably in 2003 or 2004, and it was very, very interesting. And then I just started to scroll through other interviews that Scott Horton had done, and sure enough, he had done one with Hans Hermann Hoppe. The title of the interview was "The Myth of the Myth of National Defense," which was Hoppe's other book that came out after Democracy, the God That Failed. And that interview, that talk by Hans Hermann Hoppe is what made me shift from minarchist to anarcho-capitalist. So he is extremely important, and it's not just to me personally, to a lot of people. Now, the controversy surrounding him occurred while he was teaching at UNLV, the University of Las Vegas, Nevada, or University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where he taught until sometime in the early 2000s, I think, and maybe 2004, 2005. Late in his teaching career, he was giving a lecture, and he was talking about the idea of time preference. Time preference is basically how much you value future goods relative to current goods relative to each other. So a high time preference means that you prefer the here and now more than future things. Now, the group that just demonstrates high time preference the most, there's a couple groups. The one that demonstrates it the most are young children. They do experiments, for instance, where they'll take a kid and they'll say, listen, we'll give you, if you want, we can give you one piece of candy now, but if you wait an hour, we'll give you 3 pieces of candy. Very few children are able to say, I'll wait an hour to get 3 pieces of candy. They all want that one right away. And it's not like they're starving to death and they need it right that instant. Or even they'll go and say, you can have $1 now, but if you wait, every day you wait will double the number of dollars. So tomorrow you'll get 2, the day after that 4. Now anybody who knows math realizes in a little while you get more money than an experimenter could ever hope to give you. You become wealthy beyond the wildest dreams of avarice. But children very usually, and I don't know what the cutoff for when this phases out, because when they get older this does change, are not able to resist getting at the here and now. Other groups that are commonly asserted to have on net higher time preference are criminals. although there is a correlation there because criminality is also highly correlated with youth, not early youth, but later teens. Uh, Basically, if you work and produce, you can become wealthier. Most criminals are not living in palatial mansions and stuff. I mean, there are the top mafiosos who do, but the vast majority of criminals are basically in poverty, and they would be in less poverty if they were just sacrifice the here and now in order to invest. But another group, and this is where the controversy comes up, that's often cited as having high time preference, are homosexuals. And the number one reason that this is asserted is that homosexuals do not have children, and so children will lengthen your time preference. If you're a bachelor, if you're not married, if you don't have kids, you tend to spend all your money in the here and now. If you have kids, you end up saving more. Also, statistically, for men anyway, you work a lot more. And during a lecture, basically Hans Hermann Hoppe said this. He said that homosexuals have high time preference. One of his students apparently was homosexual and was offended by this, although there is no moral connotation to time preference. To say someone has high time preference is not to say that they're a killer or they're evil. It just means that they value present goods more than future goods. It's not exactly that offensive. I mean, you won't accumulate much capital in your life, and maybe in the long run, society would not have as many material goods if more people had high time preference. But it's not moral. That's a deontologically neutral statement. Anyway, the student got upset about it. He complained to the ombudsman or somebody, and I think mostly because Hans Hermann Hoppe is Hans Hermann Hoppe, and also because there's a hyper-political correctness. The fact that he even isolated a group like homosexuals and attributed any trait to them, even one that's not really that negative, was frowned upon and resulted in an investigation by the university. An investigation that ultimately didn't result in, it resulted in a, quote, non-disciplinary letter. They basically sent him a letter and said, please don't do this, but it wasn't something that would, say, go on his record academically as a demerit. I guess that would be the word. And I think it was mostly a non-event because I believe he had actually retired from the university before this even completely unfolded, or he retired soon thereafter and moved to Turkey, apparently with his mistress. That's what I've been told. If anyone knows anything about that, I'd like to hear it. But basically, he now has the largest libertarian kind of community outside the United States. He has a property, and I think it's called the Property and Freedom Council thing, their meeting that they have every year in Turkey, next to Mises U and PorcFest and a couple other Libertopia events in the United States. That's probably the biggest anarcho-capitalist libertarian event in the world. It's maybe debatable, but that's just my opinion. And so that's basically a summation of that debate. It didn't really go anywhere. If you read the Wikipedia article, it'll make a mention of it, because as far as academic controversy goes, even though this guy is an anarchist, that's about as far as it went. Now, well, I would like to talk, though, just about the idea of high time preference and homosexuality and all that, because people have asked me about that. And I will say it is something that is very awkward for me because I am aware of it. I have very, very low time preference. When I get paychecks, large paychecks, they tend to just sit in the bank. I'll pay whatever bills I have, which is usually most of the time only a pretty small fraction of the bills, and then the rest of it will sit there until I invest it in gold or silver. Maybe I'll buy a gun, which is debatable. You could call that high time preference or not. You're dropping a lot of money, but guns tend to hold their value. They're in a lot of ways very similar to investments. And when I buy a gun, it's not so that I can shoot it and destroy it within 6 months. It's to have it, I hope, for the rest of my life. And so a high time preferential person cannot receive paychecks like that and then resist spending them. And I know lots of people like that. I have a sibling like that. I have relatives like that. I have acquaintances who, as soon as they get money, it's out the door. They spend it on, consumer goods, on alcohol, tobacco. They splurge like crazy and they just cannot save. I, on the other hand, I can. My work schedule is kind of awkward. It's a little unusual. Basically, it's not unusual for the oil industry. It's unusual for most labor. I'll work perhaps a month. At the end of the month, I send an invoice in, and 30 days after my boss gets the invoice, he will pay me for it. So the first day I work, the first day I worked till the day I get paid could be 2 months, and sometimes it's been even more than that. And it seems like kind of a jip, but you end up getting the money eventually. It also means after you stop working, you'll still keep getting checks for some time after that. But basically, you have to wait a long time to get your remuneration. You have to be patient. And then when you do, you have to realize, okay, I can't spend all this right away because it's going to be another month before I get another paycheck. They're large enough that, that's not very hard to juggle once I got going. It was kind of hairy the first couple months I did this job. But so I definitely have low time preference, except when there's a guy involved. I can literally feel my time preference rising when there are cute guys that I interact with, whether in person, online even. Just if there is a cute guy, that takes priority over other considerations, and saving money and being patient, just that goes away. I used to joke that Philip Vegas causes my time preference to approach infinity, which is hyperbole, but it's just kind of the way I feel, and it's a really weird conflict in my character, I guess. And the other part, this book only referenced time preference once. I recommended this book in my Best Libertarian Books. That was before I had read it. I have read it. I'm probably going to do a video talking more about it and its ideas, but the book is this, The Ultimate Resource by Julian Simon. And this was a very, very thought-provoking book. I don't agree necessarily with every conclusion that he arrives at, but I think it was one of the most insightful books I've ever read. His discussion on resources and whatnot. But the ultimate resource, just to give away the title, he considers to be humans. And people tend to think of additional humans, especially if you're a population control person, and that would be the topic of another video, humans cost. Humans just are consumers. They don't produce anything, and so having kids, for instance, is a cost. And that's correct. A child doesn't produce anything. When you have a kid, they consume. You have to expend labor just to sustain them, and so it seems like it's a net loss. But as the child grows up, eventually they get to the point where they can earn an income. At some point, they'll get to the, hopefully, if you do a good job as a parent, they'll become self-sufficient, and then they'll even have a surplus. And in the long run, additional children create more wealth. There's a net increase, and he kind of makes it akin to a capital investment. When you are, say, building a factory, the time that you spend building the factory is not producing anything. You are expending enormous resources. It seems like a net loss. But once it's completed, you've increased you have this factory now that can produce, and eventually, in the long run, most of the time, it's going to be a net increase. So, in my case, I am torn between the high time preference, sexual preference that I have, and then the desire to have kids. Now, the other interesting thing, basically the conclusion that Simon comes to, and this is a conclusion many libertarians have, although they don't write entire books explicitly about it, is that having kids is good. If you have a lot of kids, your sustenance in old age is basically assured. I know for a fact the #1 factor that determines whether you'll end up in a nursing home or not, and most people do, is whether you have 3 or more daughters. If you have 3 or more daughters, there's a much higher likelihood that you'll never end up in a nursing home, because either one or all 3 of them will in some way take care of you. Either you'll move in with them, they'll move in with you, they'll rotate. It's just, when you have lots of children, it's likely, if you have one child, it's possible that one child will grow up and take care of you, either because they're wealthy enough to be able to, although not that many children will become so wealthy they can support their parents at least that well, or at the very least subsidize you. But if you have more and more kids, it's almost like an investment. And I know a family that has 9 children, and of course when all the children were young, and the spread in the years was probably close to probably 18 years from the oldest to the youngest. They had about 9, so they averaged about one every 2 years for 18 years. Well, those kids, you know, for the first 18 years, none of those kids were making money. All of them were consuming, and the parents were living, and the family were living, you know, on bare subsistence. Both the parents were earning money, but you know, their kids were eating all of it and clothing all of it, and they had to be very, very cost effective. Like for Christmas, they couldn't really all get 9 kids all a whole bunch of gifts. You know, when I was growing up, I had me and my brother. We get lots of gifts because there were only 2 of us. They wouldn't be able to do that, and so the dad would have to kind of make it more of an event. So he would hide each gift and make it kind of like a game where they had to search for it, and you know, eventually it was more of an event and not something that he could just dispense lots of gifts for. But eventually, the oldest kid started to work, and as soon as the oldest kid started to work, the parents went to the kid and said, "Okay, you can live here, but here's what it costs. Like, if you want us to drive you someplace, we'll do it, but this is how much it costs. If your room, the electrical bill for is this much." Now, just the one kid working and 8 not, that didn't make a big difference, but eventually they got to the point where it was 4, 5 kids working, and then of course they start to move out of the house, but they still have their own independent incomes, and they're getting to the point now, I don't know for sure because I haven't talked to her in a while, but I think there's probably 3 kids at home, 6 kids out. All 6 of them have jobs and are generating income, and it is very unlikely that these parents will ever end up in a nursing home. Their financial situation will increase dramatically, because their expenditures will drop, but they literally can expect revenue to start flowing in from their kids. I mean, if their kids hate them, the kids won't financially support them. You know, that's the thing. But the potential, this is true with just any investment, because you can build a factory and it turns out it's a bust. But the potential is they could have a very stable economic livelihood for as long as their children are alive, which certainly is going to be longer than they are. So Simon takes the view that this is an economic field, but because he values prosperity and because he values human flourishing, he considers additional humans to be wonderful. I know Brian Kaplan has a book, I haven't read it, about the economic benefits of having children. Like I said, I haven't read it, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if it followed Simon's logic here. And basically it has this weird kind of intersection with the Christian idea of to go forth and multiply. A lot of libertarians who look at it this way, there aren't very many Malthusian libertarians. I mean, if you watch the Hayek versus Keynes video, Malthus was definitely on the Keynes side, as opposed to Say and Mises, who are on the Hayek side. You know, we tend to view children as being a boon to society, a good thing, and I would like to have children, and I'd like to have quite a few. Not just because I want them to take care of me and all that. I just think children are really cool. But that's a long-term, goal. The high tie preference thing, that is kind of getting in the way of that goal. So it's a really, like in my life right now, that's the biggest unresolved issue that I have. Like financially, I'm in great shape. I'm in the best shape that I've ever been in. I'm not saying that will always last. And in fact, I plan on the assumption that it won't. But how am I going to resolve this is a question that I haven't worked out yet. I seriously, and this is going to sound weird, I'm considering just going to somebody and saying, listen, here's the deal. I want kids. I have money. I have good genes. I'm smart. I'm healthy. I like guys, but that's good for you because that means I'm never going to cheat on you with another woman because I'm really not interested. I don't know how that's going to fly. It probably wouldn't fly for most people. I don't think it would be disingenuous to go to a girl and pretend like you spent your life, checking out girls when it was the other way around. But uh, that is something that I'm seriously considering, and that is also the reason why I am not out in real life. I am out on YouTube. I'm not out in real life. I think there are probably people in my life who suspect that I'm gay, but none of them have said so to my face or given any reason for me to think that they were imagining that. And the reason I am not out in real life is because I'm holding that option open. I'm not worried about what my family would think or do or anything like that. I'm worried about potentially ruining my low time preference goals by doing something it's a social ritual that's not necessary. I don't need to be out to be a fulfilled individual, in my opinion. Now, that said, there are gay people who have children. I have a subscriber who's gay and he has children through lesbians. But, I mean, the chances of that working out are not great, and I would like to raise them, be in my children's lives and raise them to be, libertarian anarcho-radicals who go out and go shooting all the time. I mean, I have every fantasy about raising, upstanding children that anyone could have, and I think that's less likely with a lesbian. Also, I just find lesbians to be totally revolting, and I know that's personal and subjective and politically incorrect, but I'm not the politically correct type. Lesbians are not for me. Even girls, it's like, okay, whatever. My time preference does not go up when I'm around a girl. It goes up when I'm around a cute guy, not a good-looking girl. Which, I guess I can appreciate a good-looking girl, but I never do double takes or, it's not what I think about. But a lesbian, that's just wrong on so many levels. I don't even know. I mean, they don't like guys, which, how can you not like guys? Guys are amazing. This is the thing, like, when you're gay, you just really appreciate guys the way that they should, unlike women who do not appreciate guys the way that they should most of the time. There are exceptions. But then, so they don't like guys, but then they really like girls. And I'm like, that's so boring. Like, girls are lacking the most interesting piece of anatomy as far as I'm concerned. It's like, it's just boring. There's nothing interesting about that, at least to me. I realize that my opinion is not shared by the majority of the population, but there it is. So, this is an interesting dilemma in my life, but it also reflects a broader principle. Because even if you're straight, you're struck with, should I just be dating girls to get a little pussy, or do I want someone who's going to be my soulmate? Do I even care about that? I'm thinking, even though I'm still relatively young, I'm not going to be relatively young for the rest of my life. And, the old gay guy, I mean, when you're young, it's awesome because there are all these young hot guys walking around, but, who likes the old gray, nobody. And if if you're not, I mean, sometimes they'll pair up and, that's great. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do that and good for them, but, like, yeah, it's nice now, but how is it going to be in 30, 40, 50 years? It doesn't end up nearly as well as the lower time preference alternative. So anyway, those are pretty much my views on it. I am going to do another video probably, although not soon, going into more detail about The Ultimate Resource. Again, I highly recommend that book. It's kind of long. There's an enormous amount of empirical stuff in there. Simon is a Chicago school economist. He references Hayek several times. Oh, and that's, just to go, I don't know why. On the back of here it has Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman who are endorsing it. And then Milton Friedman wrote kind of like the introduction. at the end, there are 2 letters that he received from F.A. Hayek, and F.A. Hayek basically says, "This is the best book I have ever read. In my entire life, I have never sent a laudatory letter to anybody because I think it's unprofessional, and yet you have accumulated empirical proof for ideas that I believed but had no evidence to think was true, and for that I am absolutely thankful to you." So high praise from just the highest authority that you could have at the time, everyone else of note being dead. So good book, and it brings out some pretty relevant day-to-day issues in addition to thinking about things philosophically over the long term. So anyway, that's my views on homosexuality and time preference and Hans Hermann Hoppe and Julian Simon, and that's it. Bye-bye.